It had been years since I'd been invited to Christmas dinner at my son's house. I still remember the first time he moved out. That tiny apartment with paint peeling off the corners, where he'd proudly shown me the cheap second-hand sofa he bought with his first paycheck. Back then, he used to say, "Dad, one day, I'll host Christmas at my place. You just wait." Well, I waited, and this year, finally, that invitation came. The message was simple, almost too simple. "Dad, we're hosting Christmas dinner this year. You should come." No emojis. No warmth. No, "can't wait to see you." Just a message that sounded more like an obligation than an invitation. But still, it was something. At 72, you learn not to expect grand gestures. You just take whatever little kindness life throws at you and hold on to it like a child clutching a snowflake before it melts away. I remember standing in front of my small wardrobe that morning, holding up my only decent sweater, the deep maroon one my late wife, Martha, had knitted for me 15 years ago. The one with the slightly uneven stitching near the collar. She used to joke, "It's not perfect, but neither are you." That sweater still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. Even after all these years, I pressed it to my face, breathing in what was left of her memory, and smiled weakly. "Wish you were coming with me, Martha," I whispered. Her photo on the dresser seemed to smile back. I left my small apartment just as the first snow began to fall. The world outside looked so clean. White rooftops, twinkling lights in every window, people laughing as they carried gifts. Christmas has a way of making everything look softer, even the broken parts of life. When I reached my son's neighborhood, I slowed down. It was a nice area, big houses, SUVs parked in driveways, everything decorated perfectly. His home stood at the corner, wrapped in lights that blinked in sync, like it was competing with the stars. For a moment, I just stood there at the gate, clutching the small gift bag I brought, a hand-carved wooden ornament I made in my workshop. It was shaped like a star with "family" carved in the middle. Simple, old-fashioned, but made with love. I wondered if he'd like it. When the door opened, I was greeted not by my son, but by his wife, Evelyn. "Mr. Carter," she said flatly. "You made it." I smiled awkwardly. Yes, I did. Thank you for inviting me." She didn't smile back, just stepped aside to let me in. Inside, the warmth hit me like a wave. The smell of turkey, laughter from the living room, the sound of Christmas music playing faintly. I could hear children, their children, giggling somewhere near the tree. I hadn't seen my grandkids in months. "Grandpa," little Lily shouted when she saw me, running with open arms. I bent down to catch her, and for a moment all the awkwardness melted away. Her tiny hands wrapped around my neck, her hair smelling like strawberries and shampoo. "I missed you." "I missed you too, sweetheart." Then I saw my son Daniel walk in from the kitchen. He looked older. Tired. Maybe that's what responsibility does to you. But when his eyes met mine, there wasn't that spark I remembered, just a polite, restrained smile. "Hey, Dad," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. "You got here early. Didn't want to get stuck in traffic," I said softly. He nodded, glanced toward his wife, then back at me. "Well, make yourself comfortable. We're just about to start dinner." The dining room was beautiful. Long table, red napkins folded like roses, candles flickering between plates. Every seat had a name card written in golden ink. I scanned the table. At the head, Daniel. To his right, Evelyn. Next to her, her parents. Then their friends. And finally 2 seats left near the end. I assumed one was for me. I placed the small gift bag near the tree, then slowly made my way toward the table. But before I could sit, I heard Evelyn say quietly, but clearly, "Daniel, that seat's for my father." He hesitated. "Right, but," she interrupted. "We agreed, didn't we?" Her tone was sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk. I froze, still standing there, pretending to straighten my sweater as if I hadn't heard. Dinner started soon after. Laughter filled the room as plates were passed around, wine was poured, stories were shared. Stories I wasn't part of. I sat at the very end, next to the kids. They didn't mind my presence. In fact, they loved showing me their toys, their drawings, their half-eaten candy canes. It was nice. But every now and then, I'd glance toward Daniel. He looked comfortable, laughing with Evelyn's father, a tall, confident man with a booming voice. Every time he spoke, everyone listened. Every time he cracked a joke, Daniel laughed a little too hard. I could see it, the admiration, the need to impress. Maybe that's what stung the most. Because once upon a time, I was the man my son wanted to impress. At one point, Evelyn's father raised his glass. To family, he said proudly. And to my daughter and her wonderful husband for keeping traditions alive. Everyone clinked glasses. Except me. I just smiled faintly, pretending to sip my water. Then it happened. Lily called out, "Grandpa, come sit next to Daddy!" She pointed to the empty chair beside Daniel, the one that had been left unclaimed since dinner started. I hesitated, unsure, but Daniel smiled awkwardly, motioning with his hand. "Sure, Dad, come here." I got up slowly, my knees aching a little, and began to walk toward the table's center. And that's when it happened. The moment that would burn itself into my memory forever. As I reached the chair, Evelyn's father was just standing up to refill his drink. I thought nothing of it. I pulled the chair slightly, preparing to sit. But then, Daniel stood up suddenly, his hand pressing against my shoulder. "Dad, no," he said quickly, almost in a whisper but firm. "This seat's for my father-in-law. You can sit at the end." He said it with that awkward smile. The kind people wear when they're embarrassed, when they're afraid of making a scene. "Daniel," I began softly, but before I could say anything else, he nudged me slightly aside. Not hard, but enough that my balance faltered and the chair scraped loudly against the floor. The whole table went silent. I stood there, humiliated, with everyone's eyes on me. Evelyn's father looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Evelyn just sipped her wine, pretending not to notice. And my son, my own son, just stood there, looking down, avoiding my eyes. I could have left right then. I should have. But I didn't. Because a father's love is foolish like that, I went back to my seat at the far end, next to the children, pretending nothing happened. Pretending my heart wasn't breaking into 1,000 tiny pieces. The rest of dinner was a blur. I laughed when the kids laughed. I nodded when someone made a toast. But inside, I was somewhere else, replaying that moment again and again. The push, the embarrassment, the quiet apology in his eyes that never turned into words. And through it all, Martha's voice echoed in my memory. "Be patient with him, love. He's your son." So, I stayed patient. Even when my hands trembled. Even when I could barely swallow the food. Even when I realized that I had become a guest, not just in his house, but in his life. That night, when dinner was over, I quietly gathered my things. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was leaving early. I placed the little wooden ornament on the mantel where everyone could see it. Maybe someday someone would notice it. It said family. I smiled faintly, then stepped outside into the cold night. The snow had stopped. The stars were out. I looked up and whispered, "You'd be proud of me, Martha." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. But the truth was, I wanted to. Because that night, I didn't just lose my seat at the Christmas table. I lost my place in my son's heart. The night air bit at my skin as I stepped out of Daniel's house. The warmth of the laughter inside faded behind me, replaced by the hollow crunch of snow beneath my old boots. The glow from the windows spilled onto the street like liquid gold, mocking me, a warmth I no longer belonged to. I stood there for a while, pretending to adjust my scarf, hoping maybe Daniel would notice I hadn't said goodbye. Maybe he'd come running out, like when he was little, shouting, "Dad! Wait! You forgot your gloves!" But the door stayed closed. The sounds of clinking plates and muffled laughter leaked through the walls, distant and indifferent. So I started walking. The snow was deep, and the wind had a way of whispering things that weren't really there. Each step crunched against the silence, each breath turned to mist. I kept thinking about that moment at the table, the push, the silence that followed, the way Daniel's eyes darted away from mine. It wasn't the push that hurt. It was what it meant. It meant I was no longer his dad. I was just Mr. Carter, an old man tolerated out of duty, not love. There's a pain that sits quietly in your chest. Not sharp enough to scream, but deep enough to ache with every heartbeat. That's what I carried home that night. When I reached my apartment, the clock on the wall read 11:47. I turned on the heater, hung my coat, then sat in my recliner, the same one Martha used to sit in when she knitted. The place was silent, except for the faint hum of the radiator. I stared at the empty chair across from me. For years, that chair had been hers. Sometimes I still put a cup of tea there, out of habit, one with extra sugar, the way she liked it. "Did you see him, Martha?" I whispered into the quiet. "Our boy, he's different now." The silence answered me back. I closed my eyes and the memories came rushing in. It was Christmas Eve years ago. Daniel must have been 8 or 9. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. Martha was in the kitchen, humming as she baked pies. I was in the living room, struggling to put together Daniel's new bicycle before morning. "Don't forget the bow!" Martha had called. "I won't," I yelled back, my fingers covered in grease. And just then, Daniel had peeked from the stairs, eyes wide with excitement. "Dad! Santa's coming soon!" I laughed and told him, "Then you'd better be asleep or he'll skip our house!" He giggled, ran back up, and whispered, "Night, Dad. Love you." That night, after he fell asleep, Martha and I stayed up till dawn wrapping gifts, drinking cocoa, and talking about how lucky we were. We thought those moments would last forever. But forever, it turns out, is shorter than you think. I opened my eyes and looked around the empty room. The years had stripped it of sound. No laughter, no music, no warmth. Just quiet. I picked up my phone. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought of calling Daniel. Maybe to say goodnight. Maybe to pretend nothing happened. But then I remembered the look on his face, that mixture of embarrassment and shame, and my thumb hovered over the "Cal" button before finally setting the phone down. No, he wouldn't answer. Not tonight, maybe not ever. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The city was quiet, wrapped in a soft, white blanket of snow. I made myself coffee, black, no sugar, and sat by the window. The streets were filled with children dragging sleds, parents carrying gifts, couples holding hands. Everyone looked like they belonged somewhere. And I didn't. I thought about visiting the cemetery. Martha's grave was only a bus ride away, and Christmas was always her favorite holiday. So I bundled up, grabbed the small bouquet of white roses I kept in the fridge, and made my way there. The cemetery was peaceful, snow dusting every tombstone like powdered sugar, wreaths and ribbons placed lovingly by other families. When I reached her grave, I brushed off the snow and placed the flowers down gently. "Hey, love," I said softly. "Merry Christmas." I stood there in silence for a long while. Then the words began to spill, uninvited but unstoppable. "I went to Daniel's house last night," I said. "He invited me for dinner." A pause. I thought maybe things would be different this year. But my voice cracked. I cleared my throat and continued. "He pushed me, Martha. Not hard, but enough. Enough to remind me I don't belong at his table anymore." The wind answered, soft but cold. "I don't blame him. You know, I keep telling myself that. He's busy. He has a family now. Maybe he's under pressure. Maybe I just don't fit into his world anymore." A tear slid down my cheek, and I didn't bother wiping it away. "You'd tell me to be patient," I whispered. "To keep showing up. To love him even when he forgets how to love me back." I smiled faintly. "You always had more faith in him than I did." I stood there until my toes went numb, watching the snow fall over her name. Then I turned and walked away, leaving behind the only person who ever made me feel like I was enough. When I got home, the phone was blinking. A voicemail. My heart jumped for a second. Maybe it was Daniel. I pressed play. "Mr. Carter, this is Susan from St. Mary's Clinic. Just a reminder about your appointment next week. Hope you're doing well. Merry Christmas." Well, my heart sank. I smiled bitterly. "Merry Christmas to you too, Susan." No call from Daniel. The days that followed were quiet. I spent them carving wood in my workshop, making small ornaments I'd never give away. Stars, reindeer angels, all lined up neatly on my shelf. It was something to do with my hands while my mind tried not to remember. But memories have a way of forcing themselves in. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The hesitation before he pushed me, the shame afterward. And I wondered, what did I do wrong? Was I too strict when he was growing up? Too distant after Martha passed? Did I fail him somehow? Maybe I did. Maybe the way he looks at me now is the reflection of a father who couldn't love the right way. One evening, I found myself holding an old photo album. The first page was from Daniel's first Christmas. A chubby baby in a Santa hat, grinning with his 2 tiny teeth. The next page, him sitting on my shoulders in front of our old house, snow all around. Then, his high school graduation. Martha crying, me pretending not to. Then, his wedding day. Evelyn in white, Daniel smiling like the world finally made sense. That was the last picture we took together. I traced my finger along his face in that photo, whispering, "What happened to us, son?" The photo, of course, didn't answer. A few days later, I received a letter. Handwritten, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a note, "Mr. Carter, I'm writing on behalf of the Senior Center. We're organizing a Christmas follow-up dinner for community members who live alone. We'd love for you to join us next weekend. Warm regards, Emma." A small smile tugged at my lips. Someone still remembered me. I wasn't sure I wanted to go. But I folded the letter neatly and placed it on my table. Maybe I'd decide later. That night, I dreamt of the Christmases when things were simple. When Martha's laughter filled the house, when Daniel's small hands tore open gifts, when love didn't need to be earned. When I woke, there was sunlight streaming through the curtains, soft, forgiving new. I stood at the window and whispered to no one in particular. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for invitations, because sometimes family isn't where you're born. Sometimes it's where you're still wanted, a few days passed after Christmas, quiet and heavy like snowfall that refuses to melt. Life returned to its usual rhythm, slow, predictable, a little lonely. I still made my coffee at 6 a.m., read the paper I didn't care much about, and took long walks just to see people living lives that looked fuller than mine. But there was something different inside me now, a kind of hollowness that even time couldn't patch. It's funny how one small act, a single push, a single look, can change the way you see the world. For 72 years, I thought I understood what family meant. Now I wasn't so sure. It was the morning of December 29th when the letter arrived. I heard the mail slot click, and the usual piles slid onto the floor. Bills, advertisements, the grocery circular. But among them was a small cream envelope, thick and carefully sealed, my name handwritten on the front, Mr. Samuel Carter. The handwriting was neat, elegant, the kind that belonged to someone who still believed in ink and paper. I turned it over. No return address. For a moment, I thought it might be another community notice or a delayed Christmas card from some old friend. But when I opened it, my breath caught. "Dear Mr. Carter, you don't know me, but I was at your son's Christmas dinner this year. I've been meaning to reach out ever since that night." What happened at that table? It wasn't right. I don't know if you remember me. I was sitting across from the children. I saw everything. The way your son looked at you, the way you stood there. I want you to know, not everyone there agreed with how you were treated. You deserve better than silence. Sincerely, Anna. I read the letter 3 times. Slowly, carefully. At first, I didn't know how to feel. Surprised, grateful, embarrassed. A stranger had seen the one thing I'd been trying to forget, the humiliation I'd buried beneath politeness and forced smiles. For days I had told myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting, that maybe Daniel didn't mean to embarrass me. But now, here it was, written proof from someone who saw it too. I sat back in my chair, letter trembling in my hand. Anna, who was she? I tried to remember every face at that table. Evelyn's friends, her family, a few co-workers maybe. There was a woman sitting across from me, early 30s, kind eyes, quiet smile. She'd helped the kids with their napkins when they spilled juice. That must have been her. I remembered her looking at me once, right after the incident. Her eyes were soft, almost apologetic, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. And now she had. That evening, I sat at my small desk and wrote back. My hands shook slightly, but my words came steady. "Dear Anna, I remember you. Thank you for writing to me. You're kind to say what you did, but please don't trouble yourself over that night. I've learned that sometimes silence is easier than confrontation, even when it hurts. Still, your letter meant more to me than I can say. It's been a long time since someone reached out simply to be kind. I hope you had a good Christmas despite everything. Sincerely, Samuel Carter." I didn't expect an answer. But a few days later, another envelope arrived. "Mr. Carter, I'm glad you wrote back. I hesitated to send my first letter, worried I might be overstepping. But your calmness that night, it stayed with me. Most people would have shouted or stormed out. But you didn't. You just took it in silence. I don't know how you managed that. You see, I lost my father 2 years ago. He was a quiet man, too, the kind who spoke more with his eyes than his words. Watching you reminded me of him, his patience, his quiet sadness. I think your son doesn't realize what he's losing." Anna, I must have read that letter 10 times. Something about her words touched a place in me I hadn't let anyone reach since Martha died. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. A stranger who somehow understood what silence costs a man. That night I lit a candle on my windowsill. Not for Christmas. Not for prayer. Just to feel like someone, somewhere, might notice that I was still here. The next morning, I wrote again. Dear Anna, you're right, silence can be both strength and weakness. I've had a lifetime to practice it. I'm sorry about your father. Losing someone like that leaves an H that doesn't fade, only softens. As for Daniel, I don't know what happened to us. Maybe I gave him too much space after his mother passed. Maybe I didn't give him enough love when he needed it most. I used to think time would fix things. But sometimes, time just builds walls instead of bridges. Thank you again for your kindness. You reminded me that people still care, even when family forgets. Warmly, Samuel Carter. Over the next few weeks, letters became our rhythm. Every few days an envelope would appear in my mailbox. Always cream-colored, always neatly written. We talked about everything. She told me about her job at the library, about how she spent most evenings reading to children or organizing old archives. She said she'd been invited to that Christmas dinner by a coworker. Evelyn's cousin. She hadn't expected drama, only a meal, and yet, she wrote, I left that night thinking more about you than anyone else at the table. Her words felt like light in a dim room. Through those letters, I started living again. I found myself smiling at the smallest things. The smell of coffee, the sound of children playing outside, even the creak of my old chair. Anna reminded me that connection doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it comes from shared understanding, two lonely hearts recognizing each other across the distance. One day, her letter began differently. Mr. Carter, I hope you won't mind me asking, but have you spoken to your son since Christmas? I paused before answering. The truth was, I hadn't. Not a word, no calls, no messages, and neither had he. So I wrote back, No, Anna, we haven't spoken. I suppose he's busy, or maybe he's avoiding the guilt. But I'm not angry. I'm just tired of being the one who always reaches out first. Maybe love, at some point, turns into quiet acceptance. Her reply came quickly. Maybe. But I also believe love is stubborn. It doesn't die. It waits. Sometimes too long, sometimes just long enough. Those words stayed with me for days. Love is stubborn. I repeated it like a prayer. Maybe that's what I'd been doing all these years. Waiting stubbornly for Daniel to remember who I used to be to him. A week later, the phone rang. Not the shrill tone of spam calls or reminders, but that soft, familiar ring that makes your heart skip. When I saw the name on the screen, I froze. Daniel. I hesitated, staring at the phone as if it might bite. Then, with a trembling breath, I answered. Hello, Dad. His voice was careful, distant. Yes, son. I just wanted to check in. Evelyn said you left early that night. Everything okay? My mouth went dry. That night he called it, as if it were nothing but a passing detail. I'm fine, I said quietly. Thank you for asking. A pause. Listen, he continued. About the dinner, sorry if things were a bit awkward. You know how these family gatherings get. Awkward. That was his word for it. I wanted to say no, son. It wasn't awkward. It was heartbreaking. But I didn't. Instead, I said, Don't worry about it, Daniel. It's all in the past. He sighed in relief. Good. Maybe we can grab lunch sometime next week. Sure, I said, though I didn't believe it would happen. And just like that, the call ended. 5 minutes. That's how long it took to sum up decades of love, pain, and disappointment. 5 minutes, and a silence that said more than either of us could. That night, I wrote to Anna again. He called. But it felt like talking to a stranger. Her response came 2 days later. Maybe this is the start, not the end. Sometimes, broken things need distance before they can be mended. I smiled at her optimism. She reminded me of Martha that way. Hopeful, kind. Believing that love could heal anything if you gave it enough time. I folded her letter neatly and placed it beside the others in a small wooden box. The same one where I used to keep Martha's letters when we were young. It felt right, and as I closed the lid, I whispered softly, Thank you, Anna. Because maybe, just maybe, this stranger had arrived in my life at the exact moment I needed someone to remind me that I still mattered. Days blurred into weeks. The Christmas lights around the neighborhood slowly disappeared, one house at a time, until only a few flickered weakly in the cold January air. Reminders of joy that had already passed. I kept to my usual routine: morning coffee, a walk through the park, a visit to the grocery store, even when I didn't need anything. Loneliness has a strange way of turning errands into excuses for human contact. Every so often I'd pass families, fathers pushing strollers, children laughing, and I'd wonder if Daniel ever took his own kids to the park. I hadn't seen them since that dinner. I hadn't seen him either. But I thought about him. Every day. Not in anger, but in that quiet ache of a parent who's still learning how to let go. Then, one Sunday morning, it happened. A knock at my door. 3 slow knocks, firm, uncertain. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on my sweater, set down my mug, and opened the door. There he was, Daniel. Standing in the hallway, holding a paper bag, his hair messy, his coat half zipped. He looked like he hadn't slept much. "Dad," he said, almost breathless. "Hey." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, thick with everything we hadn't said in years. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in, son." He entered slowly, glancing around as if stepping into a museum of forgotten things. "Smells the same," he said softly, "like coffee and sawdust." I smiled faintly. Old habits die hard. He placed the paper bag on the table. "I brought some muffins. Evelyn made them." I nodded, though I doubted Evelyn had touched them. But I didn't say that. Instead, I motioned for him to sit. He hesitated, then took a seat. The same chair he used to sit in as a boy, swinging his legs as I helped him with homework. Now he sat tall, shoulders tense, eyes uncertain. "How have you been?" I asked carefully. He shrugged. "Busy. Work's been crazy. The kids keep us on our toes. You know how it is." "I used to," I said quietly. He looked down. "I'm sorry I haven't called much," he said after a pause. "Things just got hectic after the holidays." I wanted to believe that. But deep down I knew. People make time for who they want to make time for. Still, I just nodded. It happens. Silence stretched between us like an invisible wall. Then he cleared his throat. "Listen, Dad, about Christmas." My chest tightened. Here it comes, I thought. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my eyes. That night, it wasn't supposed to go like that. Evelyn's dad, he's kind of particular about things. Seating, traditions, you know. I said nothing. He glanced up, saw my face, and continued quickly, "I didn't mean to embarrass you. I swear, I just wanted to keep the peace. You know how Evelyn gets when things don't go as planned." I let out a slow breath. "You wanted to keep the peace," I repeated, "at my expense." He winced. "Dade, please." "No," I interrupted softly. "You don't have to explain. I understand, do you?" he asked, almost desperate. "Yes," I said. "You wanted everyone to be comfortable. Everyone except me." He looked away. "That's not fair. Neither is being pushed aside by your own son at the dinner table," I said quietly. The silence that followed was sharp. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. His eyes glistened, though he tried to hide it. "I didn't know what to do," he whispered finally. I panicked. I studied him, my grown son, the man I once taught how to tie his shoes, how to ride a bike, how to shake hands with confidence. Now sitting across from me, unable to look his father in the eye. "Do you remember," I said softly, "the Christmas when you broke that glass angel from the tree?" He frowned slightly. "Yeah, I must have been, 8? Eat," I nodded. "You cried for an hour because you thought your mother would be angry. But she wasn't, was she?" He shook his head. She said, "It's just glass, sweetheart. What matters is the love that put it there." He smiled faintly. "I remember. She always saw the heart in everything," I said. "I'd even broken things." I leaned back in my chair. "I wish I could say the same for you that night." Daniel's shoulders slumped. "You're right," he said finally. "I screwed up." There it was. The words I'd been waiting for. Not because I needed an apology, but because I needed him to see. He looked up, eyes tired. "I've been thinking about it ever since. I keep replaying that moment. The look on your face. I should have said something. I should have stood up for you." I said nothing. "I'm sorry, Dad," he continued, voice cracking slightly. "I really am." For a long time I just looked at him. Part of me wanted to tell him it was fine, to ease his guilt. But another part, the wounded part, wanted him to sit with the discomfort a little longer. Because sometimes guilt is what wakes the heart up. Finally I said, "Thank you for saying that." He nodded, relief washing over his face. Then he added softly, "You know Evelyn thinks I shouldn't dwell on it. Says it's better to move on. But I can't. I can't forget the look you gave me." My voice softened. "That look wasn't anger, son. It was sadness." He looked at me, confused. "I wasn't angry you pushed me aside," I said. I was sad you felt you needed to." His eyes dropped to his hands. "I just didn't want a scene." "And yet," I said, "the quiet moments are sometimes the loudest." We sat there for a long time. Then, to my surprise, Daniel reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "I don't say this enough," he whispered, "but I love you, Dad." The words hit something deep inside me, something that had been starving for years. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I love you too, son." For the first time in a long while, there was no bitterness in my voice, just truth. After a while, he stood up. "I should get going. Evelyn's waiting." "Of course," I said, standing too. He hesitated at the door, then turned. "Maybe you can come by next weekend. The kids would love to see you." My heart lifted, cautious, but hopeful. "I'd like that," I said. He smiled, then left. When the door closed, the apartment fell silent again. But this time, it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like peace. Small, fragile, but real. I sat back down and poured myself another cup of coffee. Outside, the snow had started falling again, soft, steady, patient. And for the first time since Christmas night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Later that evening, I wrote to Anna again. "Dear Anna, he came by today. We talked. Really talked." For the first time in years, he apologized. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I think Martha would have been proud of us. I don't know what comes next, but maybe forgiveness is less about forgetting and more about choosing love again. Thank you for giving me the courage to stay open. Without your kindness, I might have stayed silent forever. Warmly, Samuel Carter. A few days later, her reply came. "I'm so glad, Mr. Carter. Sometimes the hardest doors to reopen are the ones we closed ourselves out of. Keep your heart open. It looks like your son might finally be knocking." Her words made me smile. Yes, maybe he was. But deep down, I also knew, when people knock once, it doesn't always mean they'll stay. Still, I told myself what Martha would have said. Don't let fear ruin a good beginning. So I didn't. The following weekend, I began to prepare, bake cookies, polish the picture frames, even took out the old board games the kids loved. I was ready to be a grandfather again. But as fate often does, it had a different plan. Because the next knock on my door wasn't from Daniel. It was from someone I never expected to see again. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where the world feels gentle, almost forgiving. I'd been humming to myself, setting out cups and plates, expecting Daniel and his family to arrive around noon. The cookies were cooling on the rack. The kettle was whistling softly. For the first time in months, I felt light, excited even. Then came the knock, 3 sharp raps, confident, not hesitant like Daniel's had been. I smiled and called out, "You're early!" But when I opened the door, my smile froze. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Evelyn. It wasn't even one of the grandkids. It was Evelyn's mother. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice crisp as cold air. For a moment, I just stared. I hadn't seen her since the Christmas dinner, the night everything fell apart. She'd been sitting across the table, whispering to her husband as if my presence were some sort of inconvenience to be endured. Now here she was, standing in my doorway, wrapped in a fur coat, sunglasses perched on her head, expression unreadable. "Mrs. Pierce," I managed. "This is a surprise. May I come in?" Her tone made it sound less like a question and more like a declaration. I stepped aside slowly. "Of course." She entered, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. Her perfume filled the room, the same heavy, expensive scent from that dinner. "What brings you here?" I asked, my voice polite but wary. She took off her gloves, placed them neatly on the counter, and said, "We need to talk about Daniel." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "Is he all right?" I asked quickly. "He's fine," she said dismissively. "Physically, at least." I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She gave a small, humorless smile. "It means he's been struggling. With expectations." I folded my arms. "Whose expectations?" She looked me straight in the eye. "Mine, Evelyn's, yours, everyone's." Her words carried a strange mixture of pride and pity. "Daniel," she continued, "is torn between 2 worlds. He tries to please everyone, and in doing so, he pleases no one. You know that, don't you?" I stayed silent. She walked slowly around the room, inspecting the family photos on my wall. Daniel as a boy, Martha holding him in her arms. Christmases long before the Pierces entered our lives. "Simple times," she murmured. "Before marriage complicates everything." I clenched my jaw. If you came here to lecture me, Mrs. Pierce, you can save your breath. Was she turned, her gaze cool? Oh, I'm not here to lecture, Mr. Carter. I'm here to warn, Wes! She stepped closer. Daniel is struggling under the pressure of trying to be the man everyone expects him to be. You guilt him with your loneliness, and Evelyn burdens him with her standards. Between the two of you, he's suffocating. I felt my chest tighten. I don't guilt him. Don't you? She asked softly. That look you gave him at Christmas. Do you know he's had nightmares about it? He told Evelyn he still sees it every time he closes his eyes. I looked away. I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted him to feel ashamed, she interrupted, because he chose peace over pride. Her words stung. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, if that's all, I think you should go. She sighed, shaking her head slightly. You really don't see it, do you? See what? That Daniel will always feel torn between the father who made him and the family he married into. You and I, we represent two different worlds, Mr. Carter. You built yours with hard work and humility. I built mine with power and precision. And Daniel, poor Daniel, is trying to survive between them. Her eyes softened slightly. He needs space, not guilt. Not emotional ambushes, I frowned. Ambushes? She gestured around the room. All this, the cookies, the photos, the hopeful little setup, it's all well-intentioned. But it's pressure, Mr. Carter. You expect him to step back into this world like nothing's changed. I said nothing, because maybe in some small way she was right. Then her tone shifted, becoming colder again. I'll be honest, she said. Evelyn doesn't think it's a good idea for you to see the children right now. The words hit me like a slap. What? She thinks they're too young to understand the tension. And frankly, she's not wrong. I stared at her, my heart pounding. You came here to tell me that? Yes, she said calmly. And to suggest politely that you give Daniel some time. Don't call. Don't drop by. Let him come to you when he's ready. I felt something crack inside me. The fragile hope I'd been holding on to since Daniel's visit last week. Do you think that's what's best for him? I asked quietly. She hesitated. I think it's what's best for everyone. I walked to the window, looking out at the gray winter sky. When Martha was alive, I said slowly, she used to tell me that family isn't about control. It's about connection. You don't protect love by building walls. You protect it by keeping the door open. Mrs. Pierce's expression hardened. And sometimes open doors invite chaos. I turned back to her. You mean freedom? She didn't respond. Instead, she reached for her gloves, slipped them back on, and said, I didn't come here to argue philosophy, Mr. Carter. I came here to prevent further damage. Consider this conversation a courtesy. She started for the door, then paused. Daniel might visit again, or he might not. Either way, I suggest you let him choose. Don't chase him. Don't call him out for his mistakes. Just let him breathe. With that, she opened the door and left, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and the echo of her heels fading down the hallway. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door she'd closed behind her. Her words twisted inside me like cold wind. Maybe she was right. Maybe my longing for family had become a burden. Maybe my love had started to sound like demand. But as I looked around the quiet room, at the photos, the half-filled cups, the empty chairs, I couldn't help but wonder if love makes someone feel suffocated, was it ever love they understood? That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, the clock ticking softly beside me, thinking about Daniel. The little boy who once held my hand crossing the street, now a man being told by others how to love his own father. And for the first time, I felt something heavier than sadness. I felt erased. Not just forgotten, erased. The next morning, I wrote Daniel a letter. Not to guilt him, not to demand, just truth. Dear Daniel, I heard from your mother-in-law. I know she means well in her own way. But I need you to know something. I've never wanted to trap you between families. I only ever wanted a place in your life that didn't need permission. If you need space, take it. But don't let anyone tell you that love should be convenient. It's supposed to be chosen, even when it's hard. I'll be here, son. The door is always open. Love. Dad, I sealed the envelope, walked to the mailbox, and sent it off before I could change my mind. Weeks passed, no reply. Not a call. Not a text. Nothing. Each day I told myself he was just busy, that he'd come around. But deep down, I felt the truth tightening around me like frost. He wasn't coming. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Then, one evening, I returned home to find a letter in my mailbox. The handwriting wasn't Daniel's. It was Anna's. "Mr. Carter, I've been meaning to visit, but life has kept me busier than I'd like. I hope you're doing all right. You once told me that forgiveness is a door, but sometimes even doors need knocking from both sides. Maybe Daniel's silence isn't rejection. Maybe it's hesitation. Don't give up yet. Yours, Anna." Her letter made me smile, faintly but genuinely. She had a way of turning pain into poetry. Still, that night I sat alone, staring at the flickering candle on the table. And as the flame danced, a thought crossed my mind. Quiet but clear, maybe the story wasn't about forgiveness after all. Maybe it was about acceptance. The following day, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I packed a small bag, put on my old coat, and took the bus. Not toward Daniel's home, but toward the cemetery, to visit Martha. Because sometimes, when the living don't listen, the heart seeks comfort from those who once did. The bus ride to the cemetery was quiet. I sat near the window, watching the winter landscape roll by. Gray skies, bare trees, and distant rooftops dusted with snow. The world seemed still, almost reverent, as if holding its breath for something sacred. It had been nearly 7 years since I last visited Martha's grave, not because I didn't care, but because sometimes grief grows roots so deep you're afraid to disturb it. But that morning, I felt her calling. Maybe it was guilt, maybe longing, maybe just the need to speak to someone who once understood me without words. When I reached the gate, the chill in the air bit through my coat. The cemetery was silent except for the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the distant caw of a crow perched on a leafless tree. Rows of gravestones stretched before me, each one a quiet story that had ended too soon. I made my way to the far end, to the place where Martha rested. Her stone was simple, just as she'd wanted. Martha Carter, beloved wife and mother. Love without pride, give without measure. I knelt down, brushing the snow from her name with trembling fingers. "Hey, love," I whispered. "It's been a while." For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then I spoke again, my voice breaking the silence like an old song remembered too late. "I don't know where to start. There's a lot I should have told you years ago." I paused, feeling the lump in my throat. "Daniel's grown now. He's married. You'd like Evelyn, I think. Strong-willed. Smart. Maybe a little too polished for my taste, but she loves him. Or at least, she tries in her own way." I chuckled softly, though it came out sadder than I intended. "You'd be proud of him, Martha. He's made a good life. Big house, good job, beautiful kids." I looked down, voice faltering. But somewhere along the way, I think I lost him. The words hung in the cold air. "I don't know when it happened," I continued. "Maybe after you died. Maybe after he got married. Or maybe it was the day I started measuring love by how often he called." I took a deep breath. "Do you remember how you used to tell me not to keep score in relationships? You said love isn't a ledger. It's a heartbeat. As long as it's still there, it counts." I smiled faintly. I should have listened. The wind picked up, scattering bits of snow from the grave. I took it as her way of answering, soft, wordless comfort. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. The one I'd sent Daniel weeks ago, returned to me unopened. "He didn't read it," I said quietly. "Not even that." The pain in my chest felt heavier than ever. I keep wondering if I failed him somehow. If maybe I was too hard on him growing up, too quiet, too distant. Maybe I taught him how to be strong, but not how to be kind. My voice cracked. And now he's kind to everyone except me. I sat there for a long while, the cold seeping into my bones, my thoughts circling like tired birds. Then, almost without realizing, I started to talk to her the way I used to when I came home from work, unloading everything I'd kept locked away. "I met a woman," I said softly. "Her name's Anna. She reminds me of you. Patient, gentle, too wise for her own good. Don't worry, it's nothing like that. She's just someone who listens. And God knows, I've needed that." I chuckled bitterly. "Can you believe I'm telling you about another woman at your grave? You'd scold me for that." Then, after a pause, "But you'd also understand." I looked up at the sky, the pale sun struggling behind clouds. "You know, Martha," I keep replaying that night, the Christmas dinner, the way he looked at me when he told me to move. That's when it hit me. The boy who once fought to sit next to me at every meal now wanted me gone. My voice wavered. Do you know how that feels? To be unwanted in the very space you helped build. Tears blurred my vision, freezing on my lashes. I wasn't angry at him that night. I was angry at myself, angry that I raised him to believe love was something you earn by being convenient. That's not what we taught him, was it? The grave didn't answer, but in my heart I could almost hear her voice, soft, steady. You taught him to love, Samuel, but the world taught him how to forget. I wiped my face, letting the tears fall freely now. I keep thinking about when he was little, I said. That time he got lost in the fair. You remember? You were frantic, but I found him near the cotton candy stall, crying his heart out. And when I picked him up, he said, Daddy, I thought you left me. I smiled through the tears. I told him I would never leave you, son. The memory hit me hard, because now, all these years later, it felt like he was the one who'd left me. I stayed like that for a long while, speaking into the cold air, until my voice was nothing more than a whisper. Then I said the thing I'd been holding in since the night he pushed me away. I forgive him. The words came out quiet, almost too soft to hear, but saying them felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. I forgive him, Martha, for everything, for forgetting me, for listening to others, for breaking my heart. Because maybe that's what love is supposed to do sometimes. Break, so it can rebuild stronger. I placed my hand on the gravestone. I just wish you were here. You always knew how to bring him back to me. You had that magic, that grace. I laughed softly. You'd tell me to stop moping. You'd say, get up, Samuel. Go live. He'll come around when the world teaches him humility. I stood slowly, brushing the snow from my coat. You were always right, Martha. I looked down one last time. If you see him from wherever you are, remind him that his father never stopped waiting. Then I whispered, Merry Christmas, my love. As I turned to leave, I noticed something near the edge of the grave, a small, folded note tucked under a rock. Curious, I picked it up. The paper was slightly damp, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Daniel's. My breath caught as I opened it. Dad, I came by today. I didn't knock. I didn't know what to say. Mom's grave looks peaceful. I see why you love this spot. I don't know if I can be the son you remember, but I want to try. Maybe one day we can start over, just you and me. Love, Daniel. I stared at the note, my hands trembling. He had come. To the one place I thought I'd be alone. He had come. I looked back at Martha's grave, tears spilling freely now. Did you do this? I whispered. Did you bring him here? A gust of wind blew gently through the trees, scattering the snow like tiny blessings. Maybe it was her answer. Maybe it was just the wind. Either way, I smiled. For the first time in years, the ache in my chest eased. Because even if Daniel hadn't come to me, he had come home. And that was enough. As I walked back through the cemetery gates, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood something Martha had been trying to teach me all along. Forgiveness isn't a bridge for others to cross. It's the road we walk so we don't stay stranded in pain. And as the snow began to fall again, soft and silent, I whispered to the wind, I'm walking now, love. I'm walking. When I reached home that evening, the world felt quieter than before. I placed Daniel's damp note on the table, smoothed its creases, and sat staring at the words until the ink seemed to breathe. He had been there, at her grave. He'd stood in the same silence, spoken into the same wind. A thought settled over me like the snow still clinging to my coat. Maybe this was the beginning of our way back. I poured coffee, opened the old wooden box where Martha used to keep our Christmas cards, and found one blank envelope left inside. I didn't plan the words. They simply arrived, slow and uneven, as if her hand were guiding mine. Daniel, I found your note today. Thank you for visiting your mother. She always believed that when love gets lost, the heart must walk toward it, even if it's uphill. You don't need to be the son I remember. You just need to be the man you truly are. That will be enough. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Same address, same open door. Dad, I sealed it and stepped outside. The air smelled of frost and chimney smoke. Instead of mailing it, I walked back to the cemetery. The sky was a gray, blue curtain ready to fall into night. When I reached Martha's grave, I tucked the envelope beneath the same stone where his note had been. The snow had already begun to cover the footprints I'd left earlier. It felt right that my words would rest there until he came again. I whispered, "Your turn, son," and let the wind carry the rest. The night I returned from the cemetery, the world felt heavier, quieter, as if it were holding its breath for something that might never come. The air had that familiar sharpness of winter, the kind that bites the lungs but clears the mind. I placed my coat on the rack, sat down at the dining table, and stared at the folded note Daniel had left on Martha's grave. The words blurred every time I read them, not because they were unclear, but because my eyes refused to stay dry. "I wish I could go back, but I don't know how to face you." It wasn't much, but it was more than I ever thought I'd hear from my son again. I kept reading it until the ink looked as though it was written just for me, in that trembling handwriting that used to fill his school notebooks. He had been there, standing in the same cold that wrapped around me. We had missed each other by hours, maybe minutes, and yet, somehow, it felt like we had finally met again, not in words, not in person, but in grief. I couldn't sleep that night. I made coffee after coffee, each cup colder than the last before I finished it. Every corner of the house whispered memories. The ticking clock Martha used to tap when it ran slow. The armchair Daniel used to dive into with his muddy boots. Everything was both full and empty at once. At some point, I opened the old wooden box that sat near the fireplace. Inside were the Christmas cards Martha used to write every December. Never store, bought, always with her neat handwriting and warm words. There was one blank envelope left inside. I took it out, sat down, and began to write, not because I expected him to read it, but because my heart demanded it. "Daniel, I found your note today. I don't know what you've been carrying all these years, but I know the weight of silence. Your mother used to say that love doesn't die. It just waits for courage to find its way back. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. No questions, no anger. Just me, and the seat at the table that's still yours. Dad, when I finished, I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it on the counter. I stared at it for a long time. Then something inside me whispered, take it back to her. So I put on my coat again, walked out into the snow, and made my way to the cemetery. The town was asleep. The streetlights cast hellos through the falling flakes, turning everything into a dream. By the time I reached her grave, my shoes were soaked, and the wind had numbed my fingers. I knelt beside the tombstone and placed the envelope beneath the same patch of snow where I had found his. The moon was pale, soft, like Martha's hand resting on my shoulder again. "Your turn, son," I whispered. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. The next morning, I didn't expect anything. I told myself the letter would stay there forever. Maybe the snow would take it, maybe the spring rain. But I left it anyway, a silent bridge built on hope. Days passed. Christmas drew closer, and the town began to glow again with lights, laughter, and the smell of baked bread. Every window had warmth. Every door seemed to hold a family behind it, except mine. Until one evening, Christmas Eve, there was a knock, a slow, uncertain knock that didn't belong to neighbors or carolers. When I opened the door, Daniel was standing there. The snow clung to his hair and shoulders, his eyes were red, but not from the cold. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The years between us stood in the doorway, heavier than any storm. Finally, he said softly, "You wrote back." I swallowed hard. "You came." He nodded, then pulled something from his coat, the envelope, slightly damp but still intact. "I didn't think I'd have the courage to pick it up," he said. "But when I saw your handwriting, I couldn't walk away again." He looked older, tired. Not the proud, confident man who once pushed me aside at the Christmas table. This was a son stripped down to the boy I once held, fragile, scared, searching. "Can I come in?" he asked. Those 4 words, "Can I come in?" were everything I had prayed for. I stepped aside and watched him walk in, slow and unsure, as if afraid the floor would collapse under him. The house greeted him with silence, the kind that remembers laughter. He looked around, eyes pausing on the old family photos still hanging on the wall. One of them showed him at 7, covered in snow, grinning with missing teeth. Another, his wedding photo, the one Martha insisted we frame, even when she didn't like his wife's forced smile. "I never changed anything," I said quietly. "I see that," he whispered. "It feels like time stopped here." I poured him a cup of coffee, though my hands trembled so badly I spilled half of it on the counter. He took it anyway and sat down at the table, the same table. The same one where he'd once looked at me with disgust and said, "This seat is for my father-in-law. Get out." I felt the memory claw at me again, but this time it didn't cut as deep. Maybe because he looked smaller now, humbled by life. "I've wanted to say I'm sorry for years," he said suddenly. He stared at his coffee, his voice trembling. "That night I thought I was doing the right thing. My wife, her family, they made me feel like you were just a burden. I thought success meant leaving everything old behind. I didn't realize I was leaving myself behind too." The silence stretched. He continued, voice cracking, "When Mom died, I didn't know how to face you. I told myself you blamed me for not being there. And maybe I blamed myself too. I wanted to say 1,000 things. All the pain, the nights of loneliness, the bitterness that had become part of me. But none of them mattered anymore. Instead, I said, 'I never stopped waiting, Daniel.'" He lifted his eyes to mine. They were the same eyes Martha used to say could light up a room when he was little. But now they were dimmed by guilt. "I know," he whispered. "I saw the chair by the window when I came in. I remembered. You used to sit there every Christmas waiting for me." We both looked toward it. The empty chair, now glowing faintly in the golden light from the fire. I nodded. "It's still yours." He smiled faintly. "I don't deserve it. No one earns forgiveness," I said softly. "We just ask for it. And hope love is still listening." For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the crackle of wood and the faint ticking of Martha's old clock. Then, as if guided by something greater, Daniel stood, walked over to the Christmas tree, small, half-decorated, and began hanging the old ornaments Martha had made. One by one, he lifted each piece from the box, the snowflake she sewed from lace, the paper angel I helped him cut when he was 5. He placed them carefully, reverently. When he reached the last one, a small star with his name written on it, he turned to me. "Do you remember when Mom said this star would only shine if our family stayed together?" I nodded. "She was always the poet." He smiled weakly. Maybe she was right. We stood there in silence, looking at the glowing tree, and for the first time in years I felt the warmth of Christmas again. Not in the lights, not in the music, but in the fragile, trembling breath of reconciliation between a father and his lost son. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and endless. Inside, the clock struck midnight, Christmas Day. I looked at him and said, "Merry Christmas, Daniel." He looked down, his eyes wet, and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Dad." That night, after he left, I sat by the window again, the same window I had stared through every Christmas. But this time, I wasn't waiting, because I knew he would come again. In the snow outside, I could see 2 sets of footprints leading away from the door, side by side, fading into white. And in that moment, I finally felt Martha's presence, warm and proud, whispering through the silence, "You did it, Samuel. You found him again." I closed my eyes and smiled. The house no longer felt empty. It felt like home. Christmas morning came softly, wrapped in the hush that follows a heavy snow. For the first time in years, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the kitchen that weren't just my own. "Daniel." The smell of coffee drifted through the house, mixed with the faint sweetness of cinnamon, a smell that once meant Martha was alive, humming to carols while she baked. Now it was my son standing there, sleeves rolled up, awkwardly flipping pancakes like he used to when he was 15. He turned when he heard me. "Morning, Dad." His voice was gentle, uncertain, as if the word Dad still tasted strange on his tongue. "Morning," I said. I tried to smile, though my throat tightened. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Too quiet." I chuckled softly. "You used to say this house was too noisy?" He grinned, just a flicker of the boy I remembered. "Guess I've changed." We sat together at the table. The chairs creaked, the clock ticked, and the world outside glowed white. Neither of us mentioned the years between then and now. The silence wasn't sharp anymore, just fragile, like new ice trying to hold. When he slid a plate toward me, I noticed his hands shaking slightly. "Still nervous around your old man?" I asked. He laughed under his breath. A little, then quieter. I didn't think I'd ever get to do this again. I took a bite of the pancakes. Uneven, half-burned, too sweet. And they tasted perfect. "You always overdid the sugar," I said. "Mom liked it that way." We both paused. Her name hung between us like a light we were afraid to touch. "She'd be happy to see us here," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about her." Every time I try to talk, I imagine what she'd say if she saw us now. I leaned back in my chair. She'd say it's about time. That made him laugh, really laugh, and for a moment the years melted. After breakfast, we walked outside. The snow reached our ankles, crisp and glittering in the sunlight. Daniel picked up a shovel before I could say anything. I'll get the path. You remember where the salt is? He pointed to the shed without looking. Same place it's been since I was 10. I just stood there, watching him clear the snow in silence. Each scrape of the shovel sounded like forgiveness being carved out of ice. Halfway through, he stopped and turned toward the frozen garden. You still keep Mom's roses. They come back every spring, I said. Smaller, weaker maybe, but they come back. He smiled sadly. Guess they take after us. The words hit deeper than he probably meant them to. When the path was clear, we went back inside to warm up. The living room smelled of pine and coffee. The fire whispered low in the hearth. Daniel crouched near the tree, touching the ornaments he'd hung the night before. I didn't notice this one yesterday, he said, holding up a small wooden box tied with a faded red ribbon. I frowned. That's strange. I thought I'd packed all of Mom's things away. He turned the box over in his hands and found a tiny card taped underneath. It was Martha's handwriting, unmistakable. For my boys, open when you find each other again. My breath caught. Daniel looked at me, eyes wide. Did you know about this? I shook my head. No, she must have hidden it the last Christmas, before she passed. He untied the ribbon, his hands trembling. Inside were two small objects, a photograph and a folded note. The photograph showed the three of us at a Christmas fair. Daniel on my shoulders, Martha laughing as snowflakes fell on her hair. The picture was cracked at the edges, but her smile shone through as if frozen in sunlight. Daniel opened the note and began to read aloud. My dear Samuel and Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to each other. Or you're trying to. I've watched both of you carry too much pride and too much pain. Don't let grief turn you into strangers. Love is not a word you say once. It's a bridge you keep rebuilding, even when storms wash it away. If you ever doubt where home is, remember this: it's not walls or a table or a name. It's each other. Merry Christmas, my loves. Martha, by the time he finished, his voice was shaking. I couldn't look at him. My eyes were burning too fiercely. She always knew, I whispered. Daniel nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand. She did. We sat there for a long while, staring at the photograph. Then Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box. I didn't know if I should bring this, he said, but I think it's time. He slid it across the table to me. Inside was a wristwatch, old, scratched, and instantly familiar. My father's watch, I said, stunned. I gave this to you when you graduated. He nodded. Yeah, I almost pawned it once when things got bad, but I couldn't. It reminded me who I was before everything went wrong. I ran my fingers over the worn leather strap. The hands were still ticking. It still works, I murmured. He smiled faintly. So do we, Dad. A little slower, maybe, but still ticking. Something in me cracked open. I reached across the table and gripped his hand. He didn't pull away this time. As afternoon faded into dusk, we built a small fire in the backyard. A tradition Martha had loved. We'd sit around it, roasting chestnuts, watching sparks rise into the cold night. Daniel tossed in a few dry branches and said, Do you ever wonder if she can see us right now? I stared at the flames. I don't wonder, I said softly. I know. He smiled through the smoke. I hope she's proud. She always was. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of burning pine and something sweeter, maybe memory. For a moment, the light flickered across Daniel's face, and I saw the boy he used to be. The one who'd chase fireflies and call me his hero. I realized then that forgiveness isn't a single moment, it's 1,000 small choices to keep reaching out. And that night, we both reached. When the fire died down, Daniel stood and brushed off his hands. I should get going soon, he said. I felt the old fear stir in my chest, the fear of him leaving again. Will I see you tomorrow? I asked. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, You will, I promise. Then, he added, I'll bring someone with me next time. There's someone I want you to meet. I blinked. Someone. He smiled, that quiet, hopeful smile I hadn't seen in years. Her name's Emily. My daughter? For a heartbeat I couldn't breathe. Your daughter? He nodded. She's 6. She looks a lot like Mom. The thought filled the room with sudden light, a new branch on a nearly lost tree. He stepped forward, hugged me, firm, real, alive. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on me. I held him close. Thank you for coming home. After he left, I stood at the window again. The night had cleared, the moon hung above the snow, bright as the star on our tree. On the table beside me lay Martha's note and the photograph. Her words, still echoing through the quiet, love is a bridge you keep rebuilding. I touched the glass, tracing the reflection of 2 shadows that lingered in the snow. His and mine, and for the first time, the future didn't look empty. It looked like hope wearing a new face. Somewhere out there, my son was driving home to tuck his little girl into bed. And tomorrow, when the sun rose on a new Christmas morning, maybe she would walk through the same door, and I'd hear a small voice call out the word I'd been waiting a lifetime to hear again, Grandpa. Until then, I sat beside the dying fire, watching the last embers glow, a reminder that even the faintest warmth, if protected, can still light a cold world. The snow had softened by the next morning, and the light that filtered through the window was the kind that makes the world look forgiven. I woke before dawn, not from habit, but from anticipation. Daniel's words from the night before still echoed in my mind. I'll bring someone with me next time. Her name's Emily. I'd barely slept, imagining what she might look like. His little girl, my granddaughter. I tried to picture her face, maybe Martha's eyes, Daniel's smile. Maybe a mix of both, softened by time and grace. For years, the house had known only silence. Now it was waiting, alive, expectant, like the pause before music begins. I set an extra plate at the table, poured hot chocolate into a mug that had once been Daniel's favorite, and placed a small candy cane on the saucer. It felt foolish, maybe, but it made me smile. At noon, I heard it, the crunch of tires on snow, then the sound of a car door, followed by smaller footsteps. Quick, light, curious. When I opened the door, there she was, Emily, a small girl bundled in a red coat and white scarf, her cheeks pink from the cold. She held a stuffed bear in one hand and looked up at me with eyes too familiar to belong to anyone else. She said, her voice bright as a bell. Are you, Grandpa? The word hit me like sunlight. I had imagined it, dreamed of it, but hearing it was something else entirely. I smiled, my throat tight. Yes, sweetheart, I'm Grandpa. She beamed, the kind of smile that melts years of loneliness in a single second. Daniel stood behind her, watching, a quiet pride in his eyes. Come in, both of you, I said. It's freezing out there. As they stepped inside, Emily's gaze darted everywhere. The tree, the clock, the old family photos. She moved with that natural curiosity children have, touching everything as though it had a story. Mummy says you live in a storybook house, she said. I laughed softly. Does she now? Ha! She says it's the kind of house where love hides in the walls. Daniel met my eyes, and we both felt the ache of those words. Maybe Martha had taught his daughter that line through the echoes of memory. Emily ran to the tree and gasped. You have stars and angels and even cookies. She pointed at one of the ornaments, the star with Daniel's name.
Daddy, that's your name.
He knelt beside her. It is. Grandma made it. Her eyes widened. Grandma? The one in heaven?
Yes,
I said softly. She made all of these? She loved Christmas more than anyone. Emily tilted her head, studying the tree with quiet reverence. Then we should make one for her too. I blinked. One what? A new ornament? She said matter-of-factly. So she knows we remember. Daniel smiled, his voice breaking slightly. That's a wonderful idea, Emmy. And just like that, the afternoon turned into something sacred. I brought out Martha's old craft box from the attic. Dusty, forgotten but still holding ribbons, glue, paper stars, bits of lace. Emily's eyes widened at the sight. Wow, she whispered. Grandma was magic. Less, I said softly. She was. We spread everything on the table. Emily worked with fierce concentration, tongue sticking out as she cut shapes and glued glitter. Every now and then she'd ask, was Grandma nice? Did she laugh loud? Did she bake cookies? I answered every question as if each one were a prayer. She was the kindest person I ever knew. And yes, she laughed loud enough to make the windows shake. Emily giggled, like Daddy when he sneezes. Daniel groaned. Oh, come on. We laughed, really laughed. The sound filled the house, echoing off walls that hadn't heard joy in years. When Emily finished, she held up her creation, a golden heart cut from paper, with, "For Grandma," from Emily, written in big, uneven letters. She handed it to me proudly. "Can we hang it, Grandpa?" "Of course we can." We stood by the tree together, and I lifted her so she could place it near the very top. As she pressed it gently against a branch, she whispered, "Merry Christmas, Grandma." The lights shimmered, catching the reflection of the heart, and for a moment I swear I saw Martha's smile flicker in the glow. Later, we had lunch. Simple soup and bread, the kind Martha used to make. Emily chattered through every bite, telling stories about her school, her friends, her bear named Mr. Buttons. Daniel and I just listened. I realized something beautiful in that moment. It wasn't words that healed old wounds. It was presence. The sound of a child laughing in a house that had forgotten laughter was the purest medicine there is. After lunch, she tugged my sleeve. "Can I see your garden, Grandpa? It's covered in snow," I warned her. "That's okay. I like snow gardens." So we went outside. The air was crisp, the kind that makes your breath look like ghosts. She ran ahead, tiny boots crunching, arms outstretched like a bird. "This is where the roses grow?" she asked.
Yes,
I said. "Right there. Your grandma planted them a long time ago." Emily knelt down, brushing snow aside with her mitten. "There's one," she cried, though it was only a brown stem poking through the frost. Still, she smiled as if she'd discovered treasure. "She's still here," Emily whispered. I froze. "She's in the flowers," she said simply, "and in the stars and in the warm stuff inside." "The warm stuff?" I asked, smiling. She placed her tiny hand on my chest. "Here." Daniel watched, eyes glistening. "She's got your heart, Dad. That same way of finding light where no one else sees it." I looked at my son, at the man who had once shut me out of his world, and realized how far we'd come. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive like thunder or miracles. Sometimes it tiptoes in on the laughter of a child. As the sun began to set, we sat by the fire again. Emily curled up on my lap, her head resting against my chest. The rhythmic sound of her breathing felt like the heartbeat of everything I'd lost, and everything I'd found again. "Grandpa," she murmured sleepily.
yes, sweetheart.
"Are you happy now?" I smiled down at her. "Yes, Emily. I think I finally am She nodded, half asleep. "Good. Grandma told me you'd smile again one day." My breath caught. "She told you that?" "In my dream," she mumbled. "She said to tell you she still watches the stars with you." Daniel looked up sharply, eyes wide. I didn't know what to say. I just held her closer, blinking away tears. Maybe children see more than we do. Maybe their hearts are closer to heaven. When she drifted off to sleep, Daniel whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for what?" "For giving her the family she never knew she had." I shook my head. "No, son."
She gave it to us.
After they left that night, I stood by the window again. But this time I wasn't looking at emptiness. In the soft snow outside, I saw 3 sets of footprints. Mine, Daniel's, and Emily's, weaving together down the path. A new story. A new beginning. I turned toward the tree. The paper heart Emily had made shimmered faintly in the firelight. Beneath it hung Martha's old star, the one she'd made for Daniel years ago. The heart and the star, side by side. And for the first time in decades, the house didn't just remember love. It breathed it. Winter loosened its grip on the earth slowly, like an old man releasing a sigh. The snow that once blanketed my garden in white began to melt into rivulets of silver, and with every drip, I felt something unthaw inside me. It had been months since that Christmas, the one that changed everything. Daniel and Emily had come many times since, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes just for a Sunday afternoon, but each visit left a trail of laughter in the corners of the house, like the scent of flowers that linger after the petals are gone. I had begun to notice small, beautiful things again, things I had ignored for years. The way sunlight slid across the kitchen table in the morning, the way the wind hummed through the old oak outside, and, most of all, the way Emily's voice echoed like music through rooms that had long forgotten joy. "Grandpa, can we plant something?" She'd asked one chilly February day. Her question had startled me. The garden had been my sanctuary once, Martha's too, but I hadn't touched it since she left. The soil had gone wild, the roses untrimmed, the earth tired. Still, I found myself nodding. "Yes, sweetheart, we can." The next weekend, Daniel arrived with bags of seeds, gloves, and a little pink shovel for Emily. Mom says we should grow marigolds, Emily said proudly. They're happy flowers, so we did. The first day in the garden was chaos. Glorious chaos. Emily wore a sun hat far too big for her head and insisted on talking to every seed she planted. Hello, little flower, she whispered. Please grow strong, okay? Daniel laughed. You're supposed to bury it, not befriend it. She gave him a serious look. Flowers grow better when you talk to them. And, oddly enough, she was right. By early March, tiny green shoots poked through the thawing soil, fragile but determined. Emily would run to them every visit, crouch low, and whisper updates about her life, her school play, her best friend Lily, the tooth she'd lost. One afternoon, she looked up at me and said, They're listening, Grandpa. I think they like stories. I smiled. Then they'll love this garden. It's full of them. Because it was... Every rose bush, every patch of earth held a memory of Martha. She had planted stories in the soil, not just flowers. I began to tell Emily those stories. About the time Martha slipped in the mud and came inside laughing, her hands covered in earth. About the summer Daniel learned to ride a bike right by the fence. About how we used to lie on a blanket, counting stars until dawn. Emily listened as if I were describing a fairy tale. To her, the past wasn't gone. It was still alive, breathing in the soil beneath our hands. By April, the house had transformed. There were fresh curtains on the windows. Daniel had helped her paint the porch, and I had begun baking again, clumsy, uneven, but full of memory. Grandpa's famous apple pie, Emily called it, though the crusts were anything but famous. Daniel teased me about it. You're getting domestic again. I chuckled. Your mother used to say the same. He grew quiet then, not painfully quiet like before, but the kind that carries gratitude. Sometimes in those silent moments, I caught him watching me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Respect, maybe even love. One evening, after Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, Daniel and I sat on the porch together. The air was cool, the sky streaked with pink and gold. She's changed everything, he said softly. She, Emily. It's like she brought Mom back with her. I nodded. Children have a way of doing that, reminding us of what we thought we'd lost. He sighed. I was angry for so long, Dad. Angry at you, at life, at everything. I thought you blamed me for Mom's death. I looked at him, heart heavy. I never blamed you, son. I just didn't know how to live after she was gone. And when I finally tried to reach you, it felt like I was too late. He turned to me then, eyes damp. No, you weren't too late. I just wasn't ready. We sat there for a long while, letting the sunset fill the silence with its soft forgiveness. Sometimes words weren't needed. Sometimes the stillness spoke enough. Spring arrived with gentle stubbornness. The marigolds Emily had planted bloomed in bursts of orange and gold, like tiny suns against the green. She danced around them every visit, declaring herself Queen of Flowers. Grandpa, she said one morning, Mummy says you used to sing to Grandma in the garden. Can you sing for me? I laughed, embarrassed. Oh, I haven't sung in years. Please. Her eyes were so earnest, so full of that simple trust only children possess. So I did. I sang the old tune Martha loved, Edelweiss. My voice rough, uncertain, breaking halfway through. Emily didn't seem to notice. She just swayed softly, humming along, eyes closed. When I finished, she clapped her little hands. That's pretty, Grandpa! I think Grandma heard it. Daniel smiled. Yeah, he said quietly. I think she did too. As weeks passed, life found a rhythm again. Mornings with coffee and sunlight. Afternoons in the garden. Evenings filled with stories and laughter. I began writing letters again. Not to anyone in particular, just to Martha. I'd sit by the window, pen in hand, and tell her about Emily's mischief, Daniel's smile, the way the marigolds refused to stop blooming. I'd end each letter the same way. We're healing, my love. Slowly, beautifully, painfully, but we're healing. And each time I wrote those words, I felt her closer. Not like a ghost, but like a whisper woven through everything we were becoming. One afternoon, Emily and I were planting new seeds when she asked, Grandpa, what happens to flowers when they die? They don't really die, I said, brushing soil from my hands. They rest, and when they're ready, they bloom again. She smiled thoughtfully. Like people. Exactly like people. She pressed a seed into the dirt and patted it gently. Then Grandma's just resting too. I looked up at her, my throat tight. Yes, Emily, she is. She leaned closer and whispered to the ground, "Good night, Grandma. We'll see you soon." In that small act of innocence, I saw everything I'd been searching for: faith, peace, and the circle of love that never really ends. When Daniel came to pick her up that evening, I found myself reluctant to let her go. She hugged me tight, her tiny arms strong around my neck. "Don't be sad, Grandpa," she said. "We'll come back next weekend. And we'll bring Mommy too." I chuckled. "Then I'll bake 2 pies. 3, she corrected, grinning. "One for Grandma." I watched their car disappear down the road, marigolds swaying in the soft breeze beside me. And I realized, for the first time in years, that I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Because tomorrow no longer meant emptiness. It meant another sunrise, another visit, another chance to live. That night, I stood by the window where this story began. The same place I'd once stared into loneliness. But now the reflection in the glass was different. Instead of an old man haunted by memories, I saw someone reborn, a father, a grandfather, a man still learning how to love. Outside, the garden glowed faintly under the moonlight. The marigolds swayed like small flames, and I could almost hear Martha's laughter in the wind. I whispered softly, "You were right, my love. Life always finds its way back." And as I turned away, I felt it, that quiet warmth that comes when pain finally loosens its grip. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was something deeper, peace, the promise of spring. Summer came quietly that year. No storms, no chaos, just a slow unfolding of warmth that felt almost like mercy. The marigolds Emily had planted were in full bloom now, their orange petals glowing under the sun like little tongues of fire. The garden looked alive again. Not perfect, not manicured, but alive, wild in the way Martha loved it. Daniel had been visiting more often. So had Emily and her mother, Anna. At first, our conversations were polite, cautious. But over time, they softened, opening like flowers toward the light. And then, one afternoon in early June, Daniel came to me with an idea. "Dad," he said, "I think it's time we did something for Mom. Not sad, just something to remember her properly." I nodded. "What did you have in mind?" "A day in the garden," he said. "Emily's idea, actually. She said Grandma deserves a thank you party." Emily giggled beside him, clutching a handful of daisies. "With balloons, Grandpa!" I smiled. Then it settled. That we chose a Saturday in July, the day Martha had always called the heart of summer. She used to say that July sunlight was honest. It showed everything as it truly was. That morning, the air was thick with the hum of bees and the scent of roses. We set up a small table beneath the oak tree, laid out her favorite blue tablecloth, and placed a vase in the center. Emily filled it with fresh marigolds, whispering to each one as she placed it. Daniel brought out the old radio Martha had loved, the one with a crackling speaker, but a heart full of memories. He tuned it carefully until a familiar song floated through the garden. "Can't Help Falling in Love." Anna placed her hand over his. She adored this song. Daniel nodded, eyes glistening. She danced to it every chance she got, even when there wasn't music. I smiled faintly. She said love doesn't need an audience. We all stood quietly then, letting the melody drift between us. It wasn't a funeral. It wasn't even a ceremony. It was just love, breathing in the open air again. After lunch, Emily tugged at my sleeve. "Grandpa, can we go inside? I want to see Grandma's room." Her tone was innocent, but something in it stirred a lump in my throat. "Of course," I said softly. "Come on." The room had remained almost untouched since Martha passed. Tidy, sunlit, and filled with her scent that somehow refused to fade. The quilt she had sewn lay neatly folded at the edge of the bed. Her books lined the shelves in neat rows. Gardening, poetry, and a few mystery novels she pretended not to enjoy. Emily climbed onto the chair by the window. "This is where she looked at the stars, right?" "Yes," I said. "Every night." She said they reminded her of promises. "Did she make one to you?" I hesitated, swallowing hard. "Yes, sweetheart. She promised to keep watching over us." Emily nodded as if she understood more than her years allowed. She slid off the chair and began looking around curiously, touching little trinkets and photo frames. Then she stopped. "Grandpa," she whispered, pointing toward the bottom drawer of the old dresser. "Something's in there." I frowned. That drawer hadn't been opened in years. But Emily was insistent. "It's for you? I can feel it." I knelt down beside her and gently pulled the drawer open. Inside lay a small wooden box, one I didn't recognize. The lid was carved with tiny flowers, and on top, in Martha's careful handwriting, was a single word, "For my loves." My breath caught. Daniel had followed us in by then. "Dad," he asked softly. I lifted the box and placed it on the bed. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, wrapped in a piece of old linen, were three things: a folded letter, a locket, and a small cassette tape. Daniel's voice broke. She left something. I nodded, unable to speak. Emily climbed beside me, wide-eyed. "Play it, Grandpa." The tape was labeled simply, "When you're ready." It took a moment to find the old cassette player. Dust had gathered on it like time's fingerprint. I pressed play. There was a brief hiss of static, and then her voice, Martha's voice, soft, warm, alive. "If you're hearing this, it means you found the box." Daniel covered his mouth, tears already falling. I gripped the table to steady myself. I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye properly. But if life had other plans, I wanted you to have this, a small piece of me to hold on to. Her voice wavered slightly, then steadied. "To my husband, my heart, thank you, for loving me through every storm, for planting dreams with me in the soil of this life. If you ever feel alone, look out at the garden. That's where I'll be, in every bloom, in every ray of sunlight that touches your face." I felt my knees weaken. Emily reached for my hand and held it tight. "To my son, Daniel, my pride. I know we had our silences, but please know I was never disappointed in you. You carried your father's fire and my stubborn heart. Be kind to yourself, my love. And when you're ready, bring our family back to this house. It's where healing lives." Daniel turned away, shoulders shaking. And then came the softest, most unexpected part. "And to the little one I might never meet, my grandchild, know this, you were loved long before you arrived. If you ever visit this house, help your grandpa smile again. He has the most beautiful smile in the world, though he forgets it sometimes." Emily gasped, looking up at me. She knew about me. "Grandpa," I could barely speak. She did. Her voice on the tape softened one last time. "When the garden blooms again, it means love has found its way home. And when you see the marigolds, remember, I'm still there. Always." The tape clicked off. Silence filled the room, thick, heavy, sacred. No one moved. Then Emily whispered, "She's here right now, Grandpa. I can feel her." Daniel nodded through tears. "So can I." We opened the letter next. It was written in Martha's looping handwriting, the same script that had filled years of grocery lists and love notes. "My loves, if you're reading this, then life did what life always does. It moved forward. But don't let grief anchor you to the past. Let it water your roots instead. Plant new dreams. Laugh loud. Dance when no one's watching. And promise me you'll never let silence steal your love again. I'll be watching, not from above, but from within. Yours always, Martha." I pressed the letter to my heart, tears blurring the words. That evening, we gathered in the garden again, just the three of us. Emily held the locket, which contained a tiny photo of Martha smiling under the same oak tree that shaded us now. She placed it gently beneath the marigolds. "So she can keep watching," she said. Daniel knelt beside her. Mom would love that. The air was still, almost reverent. Fireflies began to glow between the flowers, like little souls flickering in the dusk. I looked at my son, the man who had once pushed me away at a Christmas table, and then at his daughter, who had brought him back to me. And I realized Martha had known all along that love doesn't end. It just changes homes. Her voice, her letter, her garden, all of it had been her way of guiding us here. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stepped outside once more. The moon hung low, soft and golden. The marigolds shimmered faintly in the breeze. I whispered into the quiet, "You kept your promise, my love. You brought us home." And for the briefest moment, I could have sworn I heard her voice again. Light, teasing, full of that old laughter I'd memorized long ago. "Took you long enough, old man." I smiled. For the first time in years, I truly smiled. The wind brushed past me like a kiss, and somewhere deep within the garden, a single new bloom opened, delicate, radiant, alive. Martha's final gift. The proof that love never leaves. It simply learns to bloom again. The years passed quietly, the way snow melts, slowly, softly, without announcement. Emily grew taller, her laughter stretching into new rooms of my life. Daniel grew gentler, more patient. He carried the steadiness his mother once had. And I grew old in the kind of peace I never thought I'd earn. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. It breathed. It sang, and every corner held traces of the family we had fought so hard to rebuild. Still, as another December rolled in, I felt a different kind of chill in my bones, one that no fire could chase away. My doctor called it age, but I knew better. It was the quiet tapping of time on my shoulder, whispering soon. This Christmas was Emily's idea. She insisted it had to be perfect. Because, Grandpa, she said, tugging at my arm, it's our 10th one together since the Christmas of the seat fight. She always called it that, the day Daniel had told me to leave the table. We all laughed about it now, even Daniel. I can't believe she remembers that, he said as he helped me hang the garland. She remembers everything that matters, I replied. And she did. She remembered Martha's marigolds. She remembered the box, the tape, the promise. She remembered to say goodnight to the stars every evening without fail. That night, she decorated the tree herself, the same tree that had seen both heartbreak and healing. She placed Martha's star at the top, then added the paper heart she'd made as a little girl, the one that said for Grandma from Emily. Now, beside it, she hung another heart, new, glittering silver. For Grandpa from Emily. I didn't cry then. Not yet. Dinner was warm and bright. Anna's laughter filled the kitchen. Daniel told stories about work. Emily teased me about falling asleep in my chair. But as the night grew quiet, I felt the room around me blur slightly. My body was tired. My mind wandered to the garden, to the stars, to Martha. Daniel noticed. You okay, Dad? I smiled faintly. Just thinking about Mom. Always. He reached across the table, placed his hand over mine. She'd be proud of you. I chuckled softly. No, son. She'd be proud of us. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. You know what Grandma told me in my dream last night? What, sweetheart? She said it's almost time for your next adventure. Daniel's eyes widened. I only smiled. Children always seem to know before anyone else. That night, after they went to bed, I sat by the fire and opened the small wooden box Martha had left us years ago. Inside were the same treasures, her letter, her locket, the tape. But beneath them, tucked carefully in a corner, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a blank sheet of her stationery. I realized what I needed to do. I took out my pen and began to write. To my loves, if you're reading this, it means I've gone to where your mother went before me. Don't grieve too long. We had our storms, but oh, how brightly the sun came after. Daniel, you became the man your mother dreamed you'd be, strong, kind, and brave enough to say I'm sorry when it mattered most. Never forget that being gentle is also a kind of strength. Anna, thank you for bringing light back into my son's life, and for letting Emily bring it into mine. And Emily, my little sunshine, remember, the world is full of gardens waiting for your hands. Plant kindness, grow laughter, and when you miss me, sing Edelweiss for the flowers. Love doesn't vanish, my darlings. It changes form. Sometimes it's a star, sometimes it's a whisper in the wind, and sometimes it's a story, ours. With all my heart, Dad. Grandpa, always. When I finished, I folded the letter and slipped it into the wooden box beside Martha's. 2 letters now, side by side, husband and wife, waiting to be found. I went to the window one last time. Snow was falling gently again, like the night everything began. The marigolds were long gone, sleeping beneath the frost, but I knew they'd return come spring. I whispered into the quiet, soon, my love, but not goodbye, never goodbye. Then I turned off the lights, the house glowing only by the flicker of the tree, and I sat there, letting the warmth of Christmas wrap around me like Martha's old shawl. Morning came soft and slow. Daniel found me in my chair, the faintest smile still resting on my face. The fire burned down to embers. He knew before he touched me. He knew because the room felt full, too full. Like love itself had been lingering there all night. He called for Anna quietly. Emily came running in, barefoot, eyes wide. She stopped when she saw me, then whispered, almost calmly, "He's with Grandma now." Daniel wept silently, holding her close. Emily looked at the wooden box on the table. "She came for him," she said. I heard her laugh. Anna nodded through tears. "I think she did, sweetheart." They found my letter that evening, tucked neatly in the box. When Daniel read it aloud by the fire, no one cried, not for long, because it wasn't a letter of endings. It was one of beginnings. Afterward, Emily went to the garden. Even in winter, she could never resist it. She brushed away the snow near the marigold patch and whispered, "Good night, Grandma. Good night, Grandpa. Then she looked up at the stars, and I like to think she saw two of them shining brighter than the rest, one gold, one silver, side by side. Years later, when Emily was grown, she told her own children the story. Not the sad version, but the true one, how love can bend but never break. How families can fall apart and find their way back. How sometimes forgiveness takes a lifetime, but it's always worth it. She still keeps the garden alive. Every spring, the marigolds return, bright and stubborn, just like her grandparents. And every Christmas, she hangs 3 ornaments side by side, one star, one golden heart, one silver heart. The story lives on in every light that flickers on that tree. Because love, once planted deep enough, doesn't die. It roots itself in generations. It learns to bloom again and again and again.